I've made a lot of art with markers, especially alcohol markers. So for today's video, I thought I would give you guys my tips on how to use markers because they can be really tricky to learn with, and it definitely took me quite a while to get good with them. So tip number one of this video is to use the right markers. I recommend Ohuhu because they're really high quality, but they're also affordable because I know there's markers like Copic which are just crazy expensive. I've never even tried them because they're so expensive. There's a link in the description for 10% off. Just use code alirisbyartist. I've used them for years. They're not paying me to promote or anything. I just genuinely love this product, so it's really cool that they gave me a discount for you guys. I would recommend buying brush tip ones like this. They also have a chisel tip on the other end. I've tried out the finer tip, but brush tip is just the best. If you guys don't like alcohol markers, there's also acrylic markers. I love using Artex. Again, they're really good quality for the price. They've got a really nice brush tip that's really handy for making art. They're very different from alcohol markers. Like alcohol markers, you can't layer a lighter color on top of a darker color, but you can with acrylic because it's like a paint and it's thick and it doesn't bleed into each other. Tip number two is to use the right paper. This is currently my favorite sketchbook. Again, it's Ohuhu, but it just handles alcohol markers so well, and also acrylic markers work pretty good on it. You want a good paper because if you have a really cheap paper, you could rip it with the markers and it will also bleed through way more. I mean, the markers still bleed through in this paper, but the paper just handles it so much better and it doesn't rip or anything. It's nice and smooth. I've noticed when I use cheaper sketchbooks, the markers just bleed like crazy, like all over the page. It's hard to color within lines because the markers are just uncontrollable. Now that you've got good markers, you've got a good sketchbook, I'm going to sketch out a drawing so that I can give you some tips and tricks for when you're actually coloring in a character. The reference I'm using is from Martin Lopez Art. He makes incredible stuff. Definitely check him out. So I'm drawing this like symbiote Spider-Man. I thought it would make a great example. It's got very vivid colors. Another tip is to take your time sketching stuff out and make sure you have a good foundation before you start coloring. I never just go in with the markers because I want to plan it out and kind of know what I'm coloring, what area and what shades I'm going to use. The sketch came out really cool though. I think this is a pretty good drawing for this video. It was a lot of fun to make. Alright, so once you have your drawing done, my next tip is to lightly erase the drawing before you start coloring, because if you just color on top of the pencils, it kind of smudges and you'll get this grey mixed in. I like to use a kneaded eraser. It's this blue tack looking thing. They're just great because you can kind of like dab it and erase it like I'm doing here. But if you only have a normal eraser, that works too. Just don't completely rub it out because you want to still be able to see the outlines, but you just want it really faint. Now stop what you're doing before you start coloring, because the next tip is to test out your colors before you use them. So as you can see by this page at the back of my sketchbook, I do this for every drawing I make. This is a really important step because sometimes the colors look different like on the tip of the marker versus how they actually sit on the paper, and especially for a drawing like this, it's really hard to kind of pick the right shades. So I like to test it out, compare how they work together, and just figure out what I'm going to do and kind of plan it out. This really helped me level up my art because if you just go straight in, you can mess stuff up and there's really no going back. Like if you're using acrylic markers, I guess you can kind of cover it up, but it will make a real mess. And with alcohol markers, it's just going to ruin your drawing. Alright, so the next tip of the video is to put a sheet under your page before you start coloring. This one came with the sketchbook, but you can just use anything, old newspaper, whatever you want. This is to stop the markers bleeding through onto the next page. My next tip is to color before you ink. Now, this is kind of a personal one. You can ink first if you want, but I basically started coloring first because my alcohol markers were making the fine liners I used bleed all over the place because they weren't like waterproof or whatever. But honestly now I just prefer coloring first, even if they wouldn't bleed. Like I just find it so much easier and it all really comes together when you start inking. So I recommend coloring and then inking. My next tip, which I'm not even doing here, which is pretty bad, but it's to color from lightest to darkest, because with alcohol markers you can't layer on top. So you want to start with the light colors and then work your way down to the darker ones, because you can't place a lighter color on top of a darker one. It just won't work. Like I said, I didn't really follow my advice when I started this because I started with the dark on the head, but when I was doing the body I did start with lightest and went to darkest, and you can kind of get away with it if you've marked out where you're gonna place your values, and you already know. Another tip is to only color in the areas that you know are going to be visible of a color. So as you can see, I'm not coloring the whole head in with this lighter pink because I know what areas are going to be the dark purple, and then I'm also leaving blank the areas that I know I'm going to ink black, because there's really no sense in filling it in and then inking over because you're just wasting like materials. My next tip is that when you're coloring and using the markers, you want to use smooth motions so that the brush strokes aren't all over the place and super visible. So when I'm coloring in, I first like do an outline of the perimeter of the area, and then I slowly fill it in with these kind of rows that are very neat and tidy. You don't need to press down too hard. It's nice and smooth. It applies on the paper great. This just helps the color look nice and smooth, like you can see here. Like, you don't want to be able to see any of the brush strokes or anything like that. Another tip is that sometimes you need to go over an area twice to give it that kind of smooth look like this. Now, you don't want to go too crazy with this and keep coating on top of a layer. The max I usually ever do is 2, but sometimes your first pass just doesn't look very clean. You know, you can see all the lines from where you colored in, so you can just give it another bit on top, and you just need to make sure to do it nice and evenly so that one area isn't darker with another. My next tip, and this is especially for if you're making comic book or anime style art like I love to make, is to use cell shading. So cell shading is what I've been using throughout this whole video, and it's when you don't blend any of the colors. You just block out the area that you want to be one color and you just fill it in, and then you do the same with the other color. So if you look at what I've been doing throughout this video, you'll notice I haven't blended anything. So the next tip is when you're inking at the end, use some fine liners, and you also use like a black alcohol marker or acrylic marker, whatever you're using. For a drawing this size, I'll usually use a 0.5 for the details. I like to use Faber-Castell. They're my favorite at the moment, but I haven't tried that many fine liners. I'm also going to be using a black alcohol marker. The brush tip is just so smooth, it sits great, and obviously it works well with the other markers I've been using. It's from the same set. So my process here is basically to use the marker to fill in the bigger areas of black that I have mapped out, and then once I've done that, I go in with the fine liners to outline stuff, add finer details, maybe do a bit of cross hatching. Just you don't want to use a thick marker for all of it, really. I mean, I've done it sometimes before, and sometimes it can kind of work and be a cool style, but a lot of the time it's just too much, and you definitely want the thinner lines for more detail. Again, you can see I'm using the technique of it going in the same direction using the rows, so it's nice and clean. This is also very important with the black because the black can really shine with the light, especially when you're trying to take pictures of it, so you want it like as smooth as possible. And then once I've filled in the bigger areas, like I said, I go in with the fine liner. You know, I outline stuff like the edge of the head as you're seeing here, and then also the finer details, so like the eyes here, and then I'll add a little bit of cross hatching. I didn't go too crazy on this one, just a couple bits here and there. When you're inking, you want to use these smooth, controlled motions. You want to be making it one line. You don't want anything chicken scratchy. You just have to be calm, you know, control your breathing and just keep it nice and smooth. It'll come with practice, but you know, every now and then I'll mess up and make a mistake with a line or make it go in the wrong direction, or you know, these things happen. It's not a big deal. This time lapse is just showing my process for the rest of the body. So I fill in the bigger areas with the black marker, and then I go in with fine liners to add the details. I've said this in a lot of my videos, but man, it's so satisfying to watch a sped up version of the inking. Alright, so my next tip is to use a gel pen. These are basically little pens that have white ink, I guess, or I'm not sure what it's even made of, but it's great for adding highlights at the end of your drawing. And if you make any tiny mistakes while outlining, like around the border or whatever, you can cover them with this. You know, it's just a bit of white, but yeah, I use it quite sparingly. You don't want to go overboard, but I just add some little details to make him look like he's shining or whatever. If you're drawing a character that has their eyes visible, you know, chuck a little white bit on the pupil, it'll look great. Now the last thing I like to do is give a little outline to my character. Now a lot of people hate on the colored outlines, but I don't really care because I love it and I think it looks great. But adding an outline or some kind of background can really go a long way. I also love when I color a background, giving like a white outline to the character to really make him pop. I think that looks great. So there we have the finished drawing of the video. I hope this video helped you guys. It's just kind of my tips from what I've learned, because I sucked at using markers when I started. So yeah, I hope this could help you guys. It can be a lot of fun. It's definitely my favorite art medium. Comment down below what other tutorials you want to see me make, and thanks for watching.